I wanted to talk about The Women of the West, this book I've been reading. And it reminds me so much of, I made another little film about my grandmother, Mary Elizabeth Oliver. And she lived in New Mexico, and then she moved to Fresno, and then she moved to San Francisco and San Jose and Aromas. She taught school in the Valley of Aromas. And tonight I was talking with Laurel about some of my other memories about her, and it reminded me that I had two other aunts that were about the same age as my grandmother, born in probably the 1880s or maybe before. They were the sisters of my grandfather on my father's side. They had two very interesting names. One was Lily and one was Delia. And I met them when we first went back to Indiana. Although they exchanged letters with my mother. And I'm sure that somewhere we still have some of their letters about their lives. But there, I actually, when we would go to visit the farm where my grandfather was from in Pekin, Indiana, and the little town of Pekin, very tiny place. One woman still lived in her house. Lily lived in her house that she lived in with her husband, and he'd long passed before that. And I would stay overnight with her, and we'd talk, and we'd go to church down the street. And she was very proper, and I had to kind of be on my best manners because I was a teenager, and I actually wanted to be out with my cousins on the farm. That was more fun. But I do remember my Aunt Lily, and I always read her letters when they'd come in the mail. And then when I'd go out to the farm where my cousins lived, because Delia was the mother of her son was named Morris Fitzpatrick, and he had a family, and he had a son that was my brother's age, and he had a son that was I had a son that was my age, Michael Fitzpatrick, who was my friend for when I met him there. We traveled with their family to New York. Delia didn't go with us to New York. She stayed home. But they basically had lived on the site of an old Victorian house. And that was the old farmhouse. And I don't know exactly when it burned down, but they had a very thriving farm, and then the house caught fire and burned down. But she stayed on. I think probably her husband had passed by then. And she was very nurturing, and they had built another house, a kind of a stucco house for them, and they built a room on the side for her. It had a little kitchen, had a little sitting room, it had her bedroom. So when I would go out to the farm, I'd sleep with her in this little bedroom. There was two little single beds. So I got to know Delia also. And Delia would tell me various things about living in the house with my grandfather, with her sister Lily. My grandfather actually was the one that left. That was Frank Morris, and he left and went to Fresno. No, first he went to the Bay Area and lived in San Francisco and Berkeley, and taught at Berkeley. But these Lily and Delia did not have as much education as my grandfather, but they were very intelligent women, and they were very devoted to their family, and they would talk about like times long ago on the farm when they all worked together on the farm. And Delia was like the matriarch of that family, and it reminded me of many of these women that were in this Women of the West who came with their families from different places, or they ended up in the Midwest, but they had come from the East, And many of these women in the book were educated in the East, but they also came to the West. They built most of the houses of the white women that were in this book were log cabins, and they built them at various places across the country. There were also in this book a lot of stories about American Indian women and living in the tribal circles that they did and their teepees, and the constructive relationships they had with some of the white people, but they also had conflicts with them, of course. And mostly it was about the buffalo and the other animals that were running free across the ranges of. There was a lot of stories in Nebraska of this book. Iowa, Nebraska, and those states, and a little bit with Indiana. So I'm really glad to tell about Lily and Delia and the relationships that we all had. Thank you.
I have a question for you because I remember a story that you told me about a letter that you remembered reading that Frank wrote to his sister Delia, and then we ended up finding it. And it was really remarkable. And I'm trying to remember if it was in the collection that we donated to Fresno State or not. But anyways, it was about Delia was going to get married to, she was married to, is she the one that married Morris
Delia
Fitzpatrick?
married Morris Fitzpatrick.
Right.
And that was yeah. So
do you remember the letter and the kind of the context of it, because it was really fascinating? Do you recall, or
wow,
do you want?
No, I don't recall it. But she was. But I'm glad that you're reminding me of that. There was a lot of letters, and my mother really loved those letters. Oh my gosh, and she would read them to us. And
you know, I'm wondering if you were the one that told me about the letter, or if it was Grandma, because the letter was advising Delia because she was unsure if she really wanted to marry this guy.
Oh,
and her older brother was advising her. And I'm thinking maybe now that it was Grandma that brought that up, and then years later we found the letter. And I'm hoping, actually, I'll look, because the archive for Fresno State is actually online and it can be looked up, or it might be in the collection that we
that was
have.
A really good thing that my brother Bruce did, which was to open up the archives at Fresno State, which we put family letters. We put a lot of the things that my grandfather, Frank Morris, did. He taught at Cal Berkeley, and so all those memories are recorded in a good part of the letters, but conversations too. And I'm really glad that I was part of those conversations. And I'm so glad. Thank you for finding this book where we live in Oakland now.
Yeah.
And you brought it to me, Laurel. It was so nice. And
thank you to Bruce, for your brother, for making sure that some of the family stories are, being kept. And, because obviously your grandfather taught at Fresno State, and, after UC Berkeley. And so that's pretty cool that
there was a lot of family history about people going to college and people working in colleges. It's another ironic thing. My father, Bruce Morris, when he went to work at City College, and I guess I was in maybe junior high or high school when that happened. And I don't know how it happened, but my grandfather had taught at the old campus, which is on University Avenue. It's the City College now. They've built all new buildings around it. But my grandfather, and I remember many times going up to his office at the Fresno State campus when I was a kid. And of course, later when I was in high school. And then my dad, when he went to work at City College, and I don't know if he asked for that office, but there he was in that same office. And So
That's remarkable.
I like all the connections of our family, and I hope that you'll look into your family and think about things that some of the old people told you.
Well, and our dialogues, you've told me many stories. Grandma told me many stories. On my father's side, I have a
A
lot of
lot.
history that I've
Oh,
shared with you, and maybe someday I'll do my own video.
I
Yeah.
remember sitting with you and your grandmother, who was it was the same. Grandma Carmen Critchlow was Laurel's grandmother on her father's side.
Great. She was
No,
my great grandmother. Mm-hmm.
great grandmother.
Yeah.
And she was on her mother's side, and she lived on an adjoining property with where Laurel's dad Jeff grew up. So there was a history in both of our families when I married him way back in the 60s. Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but our dialogue is really important because, um, sometimes you're not remembering everything that you've told me, but I happen to remember a lot of
In
things, and
between the
then
gaps.
yeah, and then I remind you, and then it brings up another little gem, and it's really a fun thing to do. And I encourage everybody to try and do this with a parent or a grandparent or a great grandparent if you have them in your life, because these personal stories are really, really incredible.
And a lot of my women friends that are watching this, I know, have told me about their moms and their dads and some grandparents' stories too. I know I've shared these with my close women friends in Fresno. So thank you.